The Awakening. The Hegemony Council chamber fell silent as Admiral Thrix entered. His serpentine body, covered in gleaming scales of deep purple, moved with deliberate grace across the polished floor. The 7 council members, representing the dominant species of the galactic hegemony, watched with growing unease. "Speak, Admiral," commanded High Counselor Zev, her crystalline form catching the light from the chamber's illumination panels. "The reports are confirmed," Thrix began, his voice a controlled hiss. "The anomalies detected in the void sectors are artificial in nature. We've identified over 300 structures activating simultaneously across what we once called the quarantine zone." A murmur rippled through the chamber. The quarantine zone. 23 star systems declared off-limits for the past 15,000 years had been nothing but dead space, or so they believed. "Impossible," said Counselor Kresh, the massive Urtaxian shifting his bulk uncomfortably. "Nothing survives in the void. Our ancestors made certain of that during the Great Purge." Admiral Thrix activated the holographic display at the center of the chamber. A 3-dimensional map of the galaxy materialized, with a red haze highlighting the quarantine zone. 3 days ago, our long-range sensors detected energy signatures unlike anything in our database. Today, we captured this. The image shifted to show a massive structure, a space station easily 20 kilometers in length, orbiting a previously barren planet. Around it swarmed vessels of unfamiliar design, sleek and predatory. "The energy signatures match partial records from our ancestral archives," Thrix continued. "These are human vessels." The chamber erupted in disbelief. Humans, the violent, unpredictable species that had nearly brought the early hegemony to its knees before being eradicated, were supposed to be extinct. "Impossible," Kresh repeated, though his voice lacked conviction. "Our histories are clear. The human homeworld was rendered uninhabitable. Their colonies were systematically neutralized. None survived." "Then our histories are wrong," Thrix replied simply. "I dispatched the cruiser Inevitable Truth to investigate." This was their final transmission. The hologram changed again, showing the bridge of a hegemony vessel. The captain, a Vexeri like Thrix, appeared panicked. "We are being hailed by a human vessel. They claim to be representatives of something called the Terran Ascendancy." The transmission dissolved into static. "That was 26 hours ago," Thrix said. "The Inevitable Truth has not responded to any communications since." High Counselor Zev's crystalline form dimmed slightly, a sign of deep concern among her kind. "What do they want? After 15 millennia, why return now?" Before Thrix could respond, the chamber's emergency alert system activated. The holographic display shifted automatically to show real-time tactical data. A fleet of unknown vessels had just emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the hegemony's core systems. "They're here," whispered Kresh. Captain Alina Reyes stood on the bridge of the TSV Prometheus, humanity's flagship and the most advanced vessel ever constructed. Through the viewscreen, she observed the glittering jewel that was Nexus Prime, the hegemony's capital world. "Beautiful," she thought, despite everything. "All ships report ready, Captain," said Commander Jackson, her executive officer. "The hegemony defense fleet is mobilizing, but they're confused. Their formation suggests they don't know whether to attack or defend." Elena nodded. "They never expected to see us again. 15,000 years is a long time to believe your enemy is dead." "We're being hailed," reported Lieutenant Chen from Communications. "It's the hegemony flagship." On screen, Elena ordered. The face that appeared belonged to a Vexeri, serpentine, with intelligent eyes and iridescent scales. "This is Admiral Thrix of the Galactic Hegemony. You are in violation of sovereign space. Identify yourselves and state your purpose." Elena stepped forward. "This is Captain Alina Reyes of the Terran Ascendancy vessel Prometheus. We come seeking dialogue with the Hegemony Council regarding matters of mutual concern." The Vexeri's eyes narrowed. "Humans are extinct. Whatever you err. I assure you, Admiral, we are very much alive. Alina interrupted. My ancestors escaped your great purge through means you couldn't comprehend at the time. We've spent 15 millennia evolving, advancing, and watching. Now we've returned. To seek revenge? Fricks asked, tension evident in his voice. Alina smiled. If revenge were our purpose, Admiral, this conversation wouldn't be happening. Your sensors have undoubtedly analyzed our capabilities by now. We could have struck without warning. The Admiral's silence confirmed her assumption. We request a meeting with the Hegemony Council, Alina continued. There are threats gathering beyond the galaxy's edge that concern us all. The ancient grudges between our peoples are irrelevant in the face of what's coming. After a long pause, Fricks responded, I will convey your request. Until then, maintain your position. Any aggressive movement will be met with the full force of the Hegemony fleet. The transmission ended, and Alina turned to her crew. And now we wait. Do you think they'll listen? Jackson asked quietly. They don't have a choice, Alina replied. Our ships outclassed theirs by centuries of development. But we didn't come all this way to start another war. In the operations center below the bridge, Dr. Marcus Way monitored the quantum fold network, humanity's greatest technological achievement, and the reason for their survival. Through it, he maintained real-time communication with the other 300 ARC stations now awakening across the former quarantine zone. Station Alpha reports full activation, he called to Alina. All cryogenic revivals are proceeding on schedule. The first wave of colonists will be awake within 48 hours. Alina nodded. Phase 1 was proceeding according to plan. After 15,000 years of exile and preparation, humanity was returning to the galactic stage, not as conquerors, but as harbingers of a warning that would shake the foundations of the hegemony's comfortable dominance. Captain, called Lieutenant Chen, I'm detecting unusual energy patterns from the planet's surface. They appear to be scanning us with something more advanced than standard hegemony technology. Alina frowned. Origin point. Coordinates suggest the historical archives. It's a deep scan, trying to penetrate our quantum shielding. Let them look, Alina said after a moment. They'll find nothing they can understand. Not yet. As the Prometheus held position, surrounded by the growing hegemony defense fleet, Alina thought about the long journey that had brought humanity to this moment, the desperate escape from Earth as the hegemony bombardment began. The quantum fold that had taken them not just to another place, but another time, 15,000 years in the future from their perspective, but only moments for the rest of the galaxy. The irony wasn't lost on her. The hegemony believed they'd wiped out humanity 15 millennia ago. In reality, humanity had simply stepped sideways through time, gaining thousands of years to advance, while the galaxy remained virtually unchanged. Incoming transmission, Chen announced. It's the Council. They've agreed to meet. Alina nodded. Prepare the delegation. It's time to reintroduce ourselves to the galaxy. The confrontation. The Hegemony Council chamber wasn't designed to accommodate humans. As Alina led her small delegation across the vast floor, she noted the uncomfortable height of the steps, the subtle atmospheric differences that made breathing slightly laborious. Intentional design choices, she suspected, to place visitors at a disadvantage. Captain Reyes, High Counselor Zev greeted from her elevated position. The Council acknowledges your request for dialogue. Before we proceed, we require verification of your identity and origin. Alina stepped forward. I understand your skepticism, Counselor. Our existence contradicts your historical records. I offer this as proof. She activated a small device on her wrist. A holographic display materialized between them, showing historical footage that the hegemony had believed lost to time. The final battle for Earth, from the human perspective. The Council members watched in stunned silence as the recording showed massive hegemony warships bombarding the planet, and then the activation of what appeared to be a planetary defense system. What you're seeing, Alina explained, is the quantum fold generator, What your ancestors interpreted as Earth's destruction was actually our escape. We folded space-time around our remaining population centers, removing ourselves from your timeline. Impossible, Counselor Kresh muttered, though with less conviction than before. The physics were theoretical even to us at the time, Elena continued. A desperate gamble born of necessity. The fold created a temporal displacement. 15,000 years passed for you, while for us, it's been barely 3 centuries since the Great Purge began. Admiral Thrix leaned forward. If what you say is true, why return now? Why not earlier, or later? The fold had to be precise, Elena replied. Our scientists calculated this exact moment for our return, when the hegemony had reached its zenith, but before the arrival of what we call the void tide. The council members exchanged glances. Explain this void tide, demanded Zev. Elena's expression darkened. During our time in fold space, we discovered we weren't alone. There are entities that exist between dimensions, predators that feed on consciousness itself. We've been fighting them for centuries in our pocket of space-time. Now they've found a way into this reality, and their advanced scouts are already at the galaxy's edge. She activated another holographic display, showing sensor readings from the outer rim. Strange distortions warped the very fabric of space, spreading like ink in water. This is happening now, Thrix asked, alarmed. The initial incursion began 43 days ago, Elena confirmed. Your long-range sensors aren't calibrated to detect these anomalies yet. We estimate full manifestation within 18 months. High Counselor Zev's crystalline form pulsed with agitation. You expect us to believe this convenient threat appeared just as you returned. This could be an elaborate deception to justify your presence. I anticipated your skepticism, Elena replied calmly. That's why I'm prepared to share our quantum fold technology as a gesture of good faith. It's the only defense against the void tide. The offer sent shockwaves through the council. Such technology would revolutionize hegemony capabilities overnight. And in exchange, Thrix asked, eyes narrowed. Recognition of Terran sovereignty within the former quarantine zone. A formal alliance against the coming threat, and acknowledgement of the historical wrongs committed against our species. The council chamber erupted in heated debate. Elena stood calmly at the center, her delegation silent beside her. She had expected resistance. 15,000 years of believing humans extinct wouldn't be undone in a single meeting. Finally, Counselor Kresh spoke. We require time to verify your claims about this void tide. In the meantime, your fleet will withdraw to the edge of our territory. That's not possible, Elena replied firmly. Our stations are already activating. Millions of humans are awakening from cryosleep as we speak. We won't abandon them based on your discomfort with our existence. Thrix rose to his full height. Then you leave us no choice but to consider your presence an act of aggression. Elena met his gaze unflinchingly. We didn't come seeking conflict, Admiral, but we're prepared for it. As tension escalated in the chamber, alarms suddenly blared. A hegemony officer rushed in, approaching Thrix with urgent news. The Admiral's expression shifted from confidence to shock. What is it? Demanded Zev. Our defensive fleet around Nexus Prime, Thrix said slowly. Half the ships have gone dark. Systems failing without explanation. Elena sighed. That would be the Nova Protocol, a non-lethal demonstration of our technological superiority. Your crews are unharmed, but their vessels have been temporarily neutralized. The Council stared at her in disbelief and growing fear. We could have deployed this against your entire fleet, Elena continued. Instead, we chose a measured response to your hostility. The affected ships will regain functionality in exactly 1 hour. She stepped closer to the Council's platform. I understand your fear. 15,000 years ago, our species fought viciously against extinction. But we've evolved beyond the humans you try to eradicate. We don't seek dominance or revenge. We seek survival for all sentient life in this galaxy. You speak of peace while demonstrating weapons of war, Fricks hissed. I'm demonstrating the futility of conflict between us, Alina corrected. The real enemy is approaching, and neither of us can face it alone. High Counselor Zev's crystalline structure dimmed in thought. You said you've been fighting these entities for centuries. Have you defeated them? We've held them at bay, Alina answered honestly. But our resources were limited in fold space. Here, with the combined technological knowledge of both our civilizations, we might stand a chance. The council members conferred quietly among themselves. Finally, Zev addressed Alina again. We will dispatch scientific teams to verify your claims about this void tide. In the meantime, we propose a temporary accord. Your fleet may remain in its current position, but no further expansion until our investigation is complete. Alina nodded. Acceptable, with one condition. Your scientists must be accompanied by ours. The entities we face can influence perception. Without proper protection, your teams won't survive first contact. The tension in the chamber slowly began to dissipate. Not trust, not yet, but the first fragile tendrils of cooperation taking root. As the meeting concluded, Admiral Fricks approached Alina privately. Your technology, he said quietly. It's beyond anything we've conceived. If you truly wished us harm, we would have struck without warning. Alina finished for him. Remember that in the days ahead, Admiral, when your military advisors suggest preemptive action against our arc stations. Frick's expression confirmed her suspicion. You've changed in 15,000 years. We had to, Alina replied. Survival required it. The question is whether the hegemony can change quickly enough to face what's coming. As Alina's delegation prepared to return to the Prometheus, Dr. Wei received an urgent communication from Station Alpha. Captain, he said quietly, we have confirmation. Void entities have breached the outer defensive line. They're adapting faster than our models predicted. Alina's expression remained neutral, aware of the watching hegemony officials. Understood. Initiate contingency Helios. The confrontation had begun more peacefully than she'd dared hope. But the real test lay ahead. Convincing a galaxy that had once tried to exterminate humanity that they now represented its only hope for survival. The new dawn. 1 month after humanity's return, the galaxy stood transformed. The initial skepticism of the hegemony had crumbled in the face of irrefutable evidence. Joint scientific expeditions to the galaxy's edge had confirmed Alina's warnings. The void tide was real, and it was advancing faster than even humanity had predicted. On the observation deck of Station Alpha, Alina stood before a vast viewport, watching as hegemony ships maneuvered alongside Terran vessels in coordinated defense exercises. The alliance remained uneasy, but necessity had forged stronger bonds than diplomacy ever could. Impressive progress, Admiral Fricks observed, joining her at the viewport. In the weeks since their first confrontation, the Vexari had become an unexpected ally, his military pragmatism overriding ancestral prejudices. They're learning quickly, Alina acknowledged. Your tactical officers have adapted to our command protocols better than expected. Survival is a powerful motivator, Fricks replied. Though many still question whether we should trust the descendants of an enemy we once tried to exterminate. Alina turned to face him. And what do you think, Admiral? Fricks's serpentine features remained impassive. I think that 15,000 years of history taught the hegemony complacency. We believed ourselves the pinnacle of evolution, unchallenged masters of the galaxy. Your return has been humbling. Necessary humility, Alina said. The void entities feed on certainty, on fixed patterns of thought. Their first targets will be species that cannot adapt quickly. Like the crystalline, Fricks observed, referencing High Counselor Zeb's people, whose rigid thought patterns made them particularly vulnerable. Alina nodded, which is why the quantum shields around their worlds must be prioritized. Their conversation was interrupted by Dr. Wei's arrival. The scientist's expression was grave as he approached with a data tablet. The simulations are complete, he reported, Based on current advancement rates, the void tide will reach the first inhabited systems within 3 months, not the 18 we initially projected. Elena accepted the tablet, reviewing the data with growing concern. They're learning our defenses faster than anticipated. The quantum barriers around Station Gamma barely held during the last incursion. There is another option, Wei said hesitantly, glancing at Thrix. Elena understood immediately. The convergence protocol. It's not ready. It may be our only option, we insisted. The theoretical models are sound. Admiral Thrix looked between them. What is this convergence protocol? Elena hesitated before answering. During our time in fold space, we developed technology that allows for consciousness transfer between organic and synthetic platforms. It began as a survival mechanism, a way to preserve our people when physical bodies failed in the harsh conditions. You transferred human minds into machines? Thrix asked, his voice betraying both fascination and horror. Not exactly, Wei clarified. We created a neural interface that allows consciousness to exist simultaneously in both organic and synthetic states. It exponentially increases processing capacity while retaining human intuition and creativity. And you believe this technology can be used against the void entities? Elena nodded. They attack through consciousness, disrupting neural patterns, inducing hallucinations, eventually dissolving the target's mind entirely. The convergence protocol creates a quantum entanglement between organic brains and synthetic networks, making consciousness too fluid for them to grasp. Thrix considered this. You're proposing to implement this technology across hegemony species. The Council will never agree. They may not have a choice, Elena replied grimly. Our latest models suggest the void tide has accelerated because it sensed our defenses. It's responding intelligently, targeting our preparations. As if confirming her words, emergency alarms activated throughout the station. The tactical display showed multiple anomalies appearing simultaneously across 6 different sectors, much deeper into hegemony space than any previous incursion. They're testing our response patterns, Elena realized, probing for weaknesses in our defensive grid. Thrix received an urgent communication from Hegemony Command. His expression darkened as he listened. The colony on Proxima VI is reporting mass psychosis, he reported. Thousands of citizens experiencing the same hallucination simultaneously. It matches your description of initial void contact. They shouldn't be this far in already, Wei said, alarmed. Our models were based on incomplete data, Elena finished. We've never observed how they behave in normal spacetime. Our experiences were limited to fold space conditions. She made a decision. Dr. Wei, begin preparation for full implementation of the convergence protocol. Start with volunteer crews from our fleet, then extend the offer to hegemony personnel. Captain, Thrix began, my people will resist. Then they will die, Elena said bluntly. The void entities don't recognize political boundaries or honor cultural taboos. They consume consciousness without distinction. Adaptation is our only chance. Over the next weeks, the crisis accelerated. Reports of mass hallucinations spread across dozens of worlds. On 3 hegemony colonies, entire populations fell into catatonic states, their minds apparently erased. The Council, finally grasping the existential threat, approved emergency measures, including limited implementation of the convergence protocol among military personnel. On the eve of the first major coordinated defense operation, Elena addressed a joint briefing of Terran and hegemony commanders. The atmosphere was tense. Thousands of ships were being deployed to create a quantum barrier around the most vulnerable sectors. This will be our first direct confrontation with the void entities in normal space, Elena explained. They will attempt to divide us, to turn our fears against each other. The neural interfaces you've received will help stabilize your perception, but nothing can fully shield you from their influence. A hegemony commander raised a question. These entities, can they be destroyed, or merely contained? Elena exchanged glances with Dr. Wei before answering. In fold space, we discovered they can be disrupted by focused quantum resonance. The effect is temporary, but cumulative. With enough synchronized strikes, we believe they can be forced back into their native dimension. And if we fail, asked Thrix, then consciousness as we understand it will cease to exist in this galaxy. Elena replied simply. The void entities don't destroy worlds. They empty them, leaving perfect, pristine planets devoid of thought, emotion, or awareness. As the briefing concluded, Thrix approached Elena privately. There's something you haven't shared with the Council, he said. Something about your true purpose in returning. Elena studied him carefully before responding. Perceptive, Admiral. You're right. Survival alone didn't drive our return. We discovered something during our time in fold space, patterns in the quantum fabric that suggest the void entities have visited this galaxy before. When? Approximately 50,000 years ago, Elena revealed. And again, 100,000 years before that. They operate on cycles. Admiral, this isn't their first incursion. It's simply the first time sentient species have been sufficiently advanced to recognize the threat. Thrix absorbed this information. And you believe we can break this cycle? Together, Elena emphasized. Not as separate species fighting for individual survival, but as a unified consciousness. That's the true purpose of the Convergence Protocol. Not merely to shield minds, but to create a collective intelligence greater than the sum of its parts. An intelligence capable of comprehending and countering the void on its own terms. A fusion of all sentient minds. Thrix sounded uncertain. My people would see this as the end of their identity, their autonomy. It's not assimilation, Elena clarified. Individual consciousness remains distinct within the greater network. Think of it as a conversation where everyone can speak and be heard simultaneously, where boundaries exist but don't divide. Before Thrix could respond, the station shuddered. Emergency systems activated as sensors detected massive distortions in the surrounding space. The void tide had arrived. They bypassed our outer defenses, Wei reported as they rushed to the command center. Something accelerated their approach. On the main display, swirling darkness appeared outside the station. Not ships or entities in any traditional sense, but distortions in reality itself. Where they touched, matter seemed to lose cohesion. All vessels, execute Protocol Sunrise, Elena ordered through the command network. Neural synchronization at maximum. Across the combined fleet, crew members activated their convergence interfaces. For the first time, thousands of minds, human, Vexeri, crystalline, Urtaxian, and dozens of other species, linked in a carefully structured network, each retaining identity while sharing perception and processing capacity. Elena felt the connection bloom in her mind, not intrusive, but expansive. Suddenly, she could perceive through countless perspectives simultaneously, understanding at a fundamental level how different species interpreted the same reality. And through this expanded awareness, she could finally see the void entities clearly. They weren't malevolent in any comprehensible sense. They were simply alien, consciousness without form, seeking to reshape reality to match their own nature. Through the collective perception of the neural network, patterns became visible that no single species could have recognized. There, Elena communicated through the network, highlighting a fluctuating point in the distortion field. That's the focal node. All ships target quantum resonance beams on that coordinate. The combined fleet responded with perfect synchronization. Beams of coherent energy converged on the identified point. The darkness seemed to recoil, then surge forward with renewed intensity. It's adapting, came Thrix's thought through the network, shifting its vulnerability. Track the pattern, Elena directed. There's a rhythm to its responses. Through their linked consciousness, they began to anticipate the void's movements. Each attack forced it to reveal more of its nature, and with each revelation, the combined fleet adjusted its strategy. What would have been impossible for any single mind to calculate became manageable through their collective intelligence. Hours passed in this strange battle, not of weapons and shields, but of perception and reality itself. Gradually, the darkness began to recede, forced back by the unprecedented unity of consciousness opposing it. As the immediate threat subsided, Elena stood with Thrix and representatives from a dozen hegemony species on Station Alpha's observation deck. Through the viewport, they watched the quantum barrier stabilizing, pushing the void distortions farther from inhabited space. "This was only the beginning," Elena said softly. "They'll return stronger, more adapted to our defenses. And we will be ready," Thrix replied. "The Council has voted unanimously to implement the Convergence Protocol across all core worlds. Your people's technology will become the foundation of our shared future." Elena nodded. It was always the plan. Not conquest, not revenge, but synthesis. A new form of civilization that transcends the limitations of individual species. "The irony isn't lost on me," Thrix observed. 15,000 years ago, we attempted to exterminate humanity because we feared your potential for violence. Now our survival depends on embracing your capacity for evolution. "Perhaps that's the lesson," Elena suggested. "No species evolves in isolation. The true strength of consciousness lies in its diversity, in the infinite variations of perception that, when united, can comprehend even the incomprehensible." As dawn broke over the nearby world, a planet once sterilized during the Great Purge and now flourishing with new life, Elena reflected on the long journey that had brought humanity to this moment. Not a return to the past, but the creation of something entirely new. Not the trembling of the galaxy before human power, but the strengthening of all species through shared purpose. The cycle that had brought the void entities to this galaxy countless times before might finally be broken, not through dominance, but through the one force they couldn't comprehend. Unified consciousness evolving beyond the sum of its parts. A new dawn was rising for the galaxy, and for the first time in 50,000 years, it brought not the shadow of extinction, but the light of unprecedented possibility.